We have the great and wonderful Scott Horton with us. Welcome to the Rebellion, sir. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here.
If you don't know who Scott Horton is on this show, and let's face it, there are some people who are coming over that are probably, you know, the Gen X, the boomers that don't know Scott, that are maybe transferring out of the conservative circles, becoming, you know, more of the libertarian type mindset, the liberty mindset, and this guy, Scott Horton, is going to blow your mind. If you don't know and you've never heard of him, you probably need to hit pause and you probably need to go stretch your brain a little bit so you don't pull something during this, and you're going to need to go back a million times and listen to what he's saying. Scott, I'll tell you, I've seen you on, I can't tell you how many different podcasts and shows out there. Your understanding of who the players are, the history of what's transpired throughout the Middle East since I don't know, early 1900s even. It is astounding to me. He is the author of A Fool's Errand. If you haven't read it, go out there and read it. It is a fantastic book. I remember listening to most of it while I was stuck in the Phoenix airport one day and going, God, dude, this guy knows more than I could ever hope to know, and I was there. So thanks again for making time. We've got a ton of questions for you, and we've got about an hour and a half or whatever your time permits, man. So let's jump into it. You wrote a post earlier today. We talked about it in episode 137 of the Rebellion, talking about kind of just the outright outlandishness of Donald Trump in Syria right now and what's going on over there with his just brazen, hey man, we're keeping the oil. Can you talk to us a bit about that first?
Well, I mean, Syria is such a mess. Essentially what happened was Obama launched this regime change attempt in 2011, but he kind of scared himself out of it, right? He knew, I mean, after all, one B-52 could have flattened Damascus and allowed al-Qaeda to take right over. The way they did in Libya, right, was U.S. Air Force fought the whole war for them pretty much. And he was afraid to commit that level of force in Syria. Instead, he just had the CIA back al-Qaeda and their friends for about 4 or 5 years. And even though that sounds crazy like conspiracy land stuff, it's not because he's a secret Muslim. It's because he's a secret Republican, essentially. And he was picking up the policy where actually George Bush had left off with the Redirection. We'll get back to Iraq War II in a minute. But in Syria, essentially, they're trying to take Iran down a peg by getting rid of Iran's friend Assad, or at least really weakening Iran's friend Assad. And then this is what completely blew up in their face in the creation of the Islamic State, which didn't just conquer eastern Syria, which I guess they would have been happy with, but they rolled into western Iraq and they took over all of western Iraq in 2014. So then we had to launch Iraq War III in order to help the Shiite government in Baghdad to roust all of the Islamic State out of those predominantly Shiite cities in the west of the country, or Sunni cities in the west of the country. Right.
Ramadi, so your Fallujah, and the big ones out there where we had huge battles.
Mosul and Tikrit.
Yep.
Yeah. And so in eastern Syria, which was like Western Islamic State during that time, right? The major capital there is the city of Raqqa, and that was, you know, the original capital of the Islamic State before Mosul. And then, but the deal is the Islamic State, those guys, they really were, as Patrick Coburn compared them to, like the Islamist Khmer Rouge. Like, they're so nutso in taking on all enemies. And here's the group that they really did not have to fight at all. The Kurds. Yeah. They didn't have to fight the Iraqi Kurds, and they didn't have to fight the Syrian Kurds. The Syrian Kurds were trying very hard to mind their own damn business up there in their little own autonomous Syrian Kurdistan. The Iraqi Kurds, they're safe in Erbil, in the mountains and behind a river. And the deal was, like, if you guys would just stay over there and leave us alone, it would have been fine. But instead, the Islamic State guys were such bastards that they made sure to pick a fight with every single person around them. The Jordanians, the Iraqi Shia, the Iraqi Kurds, the Syrian Kurds, and of course the Syrian army, and everyone in 360 degrees around. So once they pick a fight with the Syrian Kurds, the Americans say, okay, well, sorry for inflicting ISIS on you. We'll come and now save you from them. And America came and finally, at the end of the Battle of Kobani, came in with the air support and special operators with laser designators to call in the air power to destroy Islamic State and help save the city of Kobani for the Kurds. So ever since that time, America was embedded with the Syrian Kurds and using them, essentially white officers with native troops in the British style, and using them to fight the Islamic State and roust them out of eastern Syria. Well, now we're in eastern Syria. The Islamic State is smashed. But now we've empowered our NATO allies, the Turks, enemies, the Syrian Kurds, who are allies with the Turkish Kurds, who right now actually are not in the middle of a terrorism campaign, who in the past have been a terribly dangerous terrorist group inside Turkey.
Right.
But over the past few years, I mean, they've had a peace deal and participated in parliament stuff. So the Turks fear that they're really going to use Syria as a base to attack within Turkey. It's within the realm of possibility, but it doesn't seem to fit with the current circumstances necessarily. But after all, the Turks really are our allies for 70 years. By law, our treaty allies in NATO since the end of World War II, whereas the Kurds essentially were useful and expendable. I mean, look at the fact that Obama put them in that position of having to defend from the Islamic State in the first place. He wasn't crying any tears for the Yazidis then, you know. It was only once they conquered Mosul and made an absolute fool out of him, essentially. That, oh yeah, now we have to go save the Yazidis on the mountain or whatever. But before that, they didn't care about, you know, the Kurds. So all the hype on TV is that Trump has abandoned our critical allies, the Kurds, when one, they're not our critical allies. And two, yeah, he did sort of kind of abandon them because what he did was he just pulled right out after a phone call with Erdogan, when what he should have done was spent the last year encouraging them to make a deal with Assad. Now, what happened? Once America left, what do? They went straight to Damascus. In fact, they had a back channel open to Damascus for the last year. And they made the deal that everybody knew they were going to have to make, which is you bring the Syrian Arab army back in there. Hey, guess what? It's the government of Syria. Huh? Yeah. You bring them back in and they stand on the border between the Turks and the Kurds to deprive the Turks of a reason to feel like they need to invade to crush these Syrian Kurds.
Right.
So then the Russians eventually came in, said, everybody cease fire. Yes, we are going to do an ethnic cleansing campaign, not you. We're going to move everybody and create this 30-mile safe zone. And, you know, it's terrible. A few hundred people have been killed at least. And very notable in this is that al-Qaeda's allies, the moderate rebels of the Free Syrian Army backed by Turkey and the United States this whole time, they are the horrible monster mercenaries who are coming in, working for Turkey, mercilessly attacking and even committing war crimes against the Kurds, killing civilians. They shot this female politician on the side of the road, Gaddafi style, and all this stuff. These are the mythical moderates. These are the guys that the Obama government told us should replace the Baathists this whole time. And that don't worry about al-Qaeda. If we only fund the mythical moderates enough, they'll keep al-Qaeda and ISIS and Assad and Hezbollah and Iran and Russia and everybody at bay and create a wonderful new Syrian democracy. Oh, here they are cutting some woman's breasts off because they don't like her politics. So and then moderate. They shoot her in the head. Because that's what they really are, is monsters. They're not moderates at all. They never were moderates. And everyone who said they're not moderates since 2011 was right. And everybody who said, yeah, they're moderates was wrong. Or they were either lying or they were damn fools. Okay, but anyway, so now everybody's mad at Trump for pulling the troops out of northern Syria. So he starts to pull, he's got nowhere to put them. So he starts pulling them into western Iraq. And then Western Iraq says, well, we don't want them, so you're going to have to send them home. He says, fine, I'll send them home. Then General Jack Keane, the author of both failed surges in Iraq War II and Afghanistan, behind with Fred Kagan and David Petraeus, Jack Keane goes on Fox News and says, oh, Donald Trump, if you don't take the oil, the Iranians will. And so you have to take the oil. And Donald Trump is that easy to jerk his chain. Just whoever's the last guy to talk to him and say something like Iran, Iran, Iran. And all of a sudden, and I don't know if you guys saw this, but in Task and Purpose, the military news site, the headline was, it's Operation Turn the F Around.
Yeah. And
all these guys are turning around and going back to eastern Syria. And here they are, they're guarding pittance worth of oil. Like we ran this great article by Ron Ensweiler at antiwar.com, and I interviewed him about it. And he's talking about how, the Saudis pump this many tens of millions of barrels a day. The Iranians, even under sanctions, are pumping however many million barrels of oil a day. Syria produces max 200,000 barrels of oil a day. And that's when everything is fully developed and working well and you have $1 billion investment there. And in other words, there's no way in the world this is worth its cost. There's, in Donald Trump's mind, empire is a giant waste of money. Why would we be an empire if all we do is waste money and we don't even get anything out of it? But then if you tell him, yeah, but we can steal the oil, he'll be like, oh, you mean there's a profit motive in empire? We can actually benefit from it? Fine then. Whoever we got to kill, let's steal the oil. You don't care. That's fine. But then no. You're paying $100 a gallon to secure this oil that you don't even need at all. It's completely worthless to us. We don't need it. Why are we doing it? Why is he doing it? It's not for America to take the oil, really. It's to keep it out of the hands of the Syrian government. And, there was an article. I'm sorry, I want to give credit. I cannot remember where I read this. Where I read it the first time, but the quote was from a major American think tanker. It might have been in the Washington Post. But it was a major American think tank expert explaining, not cynically, but just explaining with a straight face. Well, see, what we want to do is if we can keep the oil out of Syria's hands, that keeps them dependent on Iran and a burden on Iran. Now, wait a minute. I thought we were so upset because Syria was dependent on Iran in the first place, because they were friends with Iran in the first place. Now our war has made them dependent on Iran. And now you're telling me the strategy is to make them more dependent on Iran. That's what we hate about them in the first place. Right. But you don't care now because now that's the strategy just because you want to keep Iran weak as part of the maximum pressure campaign on Iran. And this is an extra expense for them to pick up. But don't worry, Shane, because in no time flat, in fact, back in time and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, it's going to be, oh, my God, Iran is in Syria. And that's why we have to stay there. That's right. Even though right now they're telling us that's part of our purpose is keeping Iran bogged down in this mess.
It's $45 million worth of oil a day. That's peanuts to the American empire. I mean, absolute peanuts to the American empire. You know what's crazy, Scott, is like I still have, a whole bunch of buddies who are, the JTACs, the Joint Terminal Attack Controllers and things like that, who are in special operations of every branch that's out there. And I can tell you right now, when they looked at this whole situation from the very beginning, and that's the thing is they're interlaced, obviously, with your ODA, which is your Green Beret, SF type guys. You had MARSOC running these things for a while. The SEALs kind of did some of this. They're kind of back out at sea for now. But when all of this was going on, these guys were like, what the hell are you guys talking about, moderate rebels out here? These guys are not moderate rebels. These are the guys that we chased all over Western Iraq with Zarqawi and the rest of those guys that were running around. And when the orders came in that, hey, listen, we're going to stand these guys up. We're going to fund them. We're going to train them. We're going to get them out there. The guys were like, you're nuts. And nobody listened at all to these guys. And then we're less than, 4 years later, when Donald Trump comes in and says, yeah, we're going to go back out here and destroy everything that we just built up over the last, 3 years or whatever it was. Nobody listened. So no, I think you're spot on, obviously, in your analysis there, Scott. And I mean, it's a horrible situation. But I don't. Let
me ask you something.
Sure.
I wonder what you think about the force protection for the men out there in those oil fields. I have a guy in my Reddit room who is I forget exactly what his rank was, but he was in the Army in planning this or that. And he was saying, in fact, it was funny. He disputed. He goes, that's not right. They're not sending Army to those oil fields because I did the paperwork on what it would take to do that. And we decided that we can't do it. The supply lines are too long to Iraq. And, this, that, whatever, logistically speaking, it would be a really bad idea to do it. And so he was like, I don't believe that. Show me that that's really true. So then I showed him the article in Task and Purpose, Operation Turn the F Around. Right. And I go, here they are. They got a few Bradleys out there, essentially. And he's like spitting mad and going, oh, my God, I can't believe that they would do this because essentially, like at Khobar Towers or at the Beirut barracks, that essentially they're hanging way out there in the wind, and they don't even have enough force protection for their own selves out there.
Right.
Now, I did read that they were sending in some reinforcements, but I don't know. What do you think about that?
So it depends. It depends. On the capabilities of a group that's out there. And I'll tell you, those are JSOC guys that are out there. When you talk about tier 1 type assets, the guys that have anything and everything at their disposal at a moment's notice. Those are the guys. So, I mean, well, and I should mention, too, there's absolutely zero chance that the Syrian army or Hezbollah or Iran or Russia would do anything. The only threat out there that faces them would be if the Islamic State can sneak a truck bomb in there. That's about it. Yeah. And one of the other things that happened, and I'm sure you know about this, is, when we were actually attacked by Russia out there, and I say, and not that, we're not out there, but, essentially Russia said, hey, no, those aren't our guys. Those are actually Russian contractors, much like the U.S. contractors. They rolled up on a JSOC compound. They absolutely got annihilated, and then they tried to roll up a couple days later, got annihilated again. So, with the air power and the firepower that those guys can harness in a moment's notice, yes. Can those guys support themselves? Yeah, they can fend off even against, really highly trained Russians and Chechens and things like that. But at the same time, if you're just going to throw lowly little, pieces of the army, or even, say Marines probably have a better chance because of just their mentality. But force protection and resupply and the ability to keep an understanding of what's going on. Everybody right now that I know is just scratching their heads after 18, 19 years of this crap going, what the hell? When is it over? And now to see, now that the emperor has no clothes and he's just basically saying, hey, listen, we're taking the oil, we're keeping the oil, this is what we're here for. And as well as we do, Bashar al-Assad out there is saying, yeah, hey, man, Trump's the best guy since, that we've ever had as an American president. They're all damn crooked, but at least he's transparent, right?
Right. Yeah, the most transparent president ever. Wait, so let's get to the heart of what you're talking about there, right? Which is that this is not the war on terrorism.
No.
Right. This is all under the rubric of the war on terrorism. And yet it's all a big bait and switch.
Yeah.
Right. So from the beginning, they did a bait and switch with the Taliban and al-Qaeda, although that one's at least more understandable because the Taliban did harbor al-Qaeda for 5-6 years leading up to September 11th. So, I think they should not have been targeted. That was a huge mistake, as I talk about in the book. But at least that's within the realm of understanding, right? Mm-hmm. The rest of this is all just an outright lie, okay? Yeah. The rest of this, listen, we got to get rid of Saddam Hussein, the guy with the French beret and the clean-shaven chin. We have to get rid of him because he might give these weapons to Osama. Okay, that's just stupid garbage, right? That's an outright lie. We have to get rid of Gaddafi. At the moment, look, they killed bin Laden, and I know people are skeptical about the different stories here, but my wife is an investigative reporter, and she nailed it down with multiple sources that night. Bin Laden was killed in Abbottabad by the Navy SEALs on the night of May 2nd, 2011. And at that exact moment, Obama is taking Osama's side in Libya, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which is, as you know, the Libyan veterans of Iraq War II, who came home from Iraq War II to Libya, and Obama takes their side.
Yeah.
And then what does he do? As soon as he's done, it's Hillary Clinton's bank shot. We'll take all of our jihadists and guns and ship them off to Syria for the next one.
Yeah.
So now in Iraq War II, George Bush gave all of Western Iraq over to the bin Ladenites. Essentially, by taking the side of the Shiites, he forced the Sunnis into the arms of the insurgency. And I don't know necessarily led by the bin Ladenites, but certainly the worst part of that was Zarqawi and the bin Ladenites, al-Qaeda in Iraq, which didn't exist before the war. And Zarqawi only declared his allegiance to bin Laden after a full year and a half after the invasion. In the fall of 2004 is when he declared his loyalty to bin Laden. But anyway, that was a huge mistake. And then I know because you were there that then Miracle of Miracles had nothing to do with Jack Keane or David Petraeus. It was the local Sunni tribal leaders got sick and tired of these Egyptians and Saudis telling them what to do and started killing them and started, the awakening started really at the end of 2005, the beginning of 2006, a full year before David Petraeus rode in to get to the front of the parade and pretend like the whole thing was his idea to bribe them to fight the jihadists, when all he was doing was finally saying, we will stop attacking you as long as you keep fighting the jihadists.
That's right.
Thank you very much. Oh, okay. Now we're going to go fight Sauder, who we fought the whole war for. But anyway, now, so In other words, what George Bush did was the hugest mistake in world history in terms of the consequences. And then came the perfect solution out of nowhere. The Baathis and the tribal leaders decided to clean up the mess for us. Oh my God, thank you, right? Then Obama comes and he takes their side in Libya and Syria. And quite deliberately, and turns both of those countries into Jihadistan for years, and leading again to the rise of the Islamic State. And so the American people gave their writ to George Bush. You find those guys that attacked us and you kill them to death and do it good too. He went and he took that writ and he went and did whatever he wanted with it. And then Obama tripled the thing, quadrupled the whole thing.
Right.
And meanwhile, you and your buddies in the Marine Corps and in the Army, as you're just talking about, you show up at the program in Syria going, well, wait a minute. Now we're on the side of the bin Ladenites? Like accidentally helping the bin Ladenites, that's bad. But deliberately siding with them just because Assad, again, with the clean-shaven chin, this time in a three-piece suit, not olive green, that we're going to get rid of him because he's friends, not with Osama, but because he's friends with Iran.
Right.
Now we're friends with Osama in order to get rid of him. And this is why in 2013, you had all of these guys holding up signs. They're in their uniforms, their fatigues or their dress uniforms. And they're holding up signs that said, I didn't join the Navy to fight for Osama bin Laden or fight for al-Qaeda in a civil war in Syria. And those went viral. It was right at the time of the first false flag sarin attack in August of 2013. And Obama was going to attack. And you had all these soldiers putting these things out viral on YouTube and viral memes on Twitter. I'm not fighting for al-Qaeda in this war. And of course, the answer was, yes, you are too. It's exactly what's going on. And I know you know that there were, I'm almost certain it was Green Berets who were murdered by an ISIS loyalist in Jordan, where here the Americans are training their enemies.
That's right.
You got these special operations guys who are training al-Qaeda terrorists on a job for the CIA.
For direct order. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing.
And then they get stung.
Yep.
Yeah. And then I think it was 2 or 3 of them. I think 2 of them got killed by an ISIS guy. You can see the footage of the shootout and everything. Task and Purpose covered this.
Yeah.
Oh, no, Soft Rep covered this. Jack, I'm sorry, I forget the guy's name. Jack something had done a great write-up on this. And here are these guys. They know that they're training the enemy. They know CIA has us training these bad guys. I hope it works out. And then it doesn't work out. They get stung in the back. The same thing happened with Ambassador Stevens. You know, why was Ambassador Stevens in Benghazi? He was there because he was running terrorists and guns to Syria.
That's right.
Now, this is the perfect example of what Richard Nixon called the modified limited hangout. Okay, a modified limited hangout is when you admit what you did wrong, but only part of it.
Right.
So that you get in trouble for that, and hopefully they don't notice the real story. Right. Now, a modified limited hangout is when you actually lie about the part that you're hanging out. So that really gets the media all, you know, essentially bogged down in the hangout because they forget the rest.
Because they're surface level and they won't actually do the reporting and investigation that's needed to go under and say, no, hey, look, this is the real story here.
Or if they just
look at the fake controversy over Benghazi. It was somewhat real controversy, was they didn't have good enough security, right? Yeah. And here they were in a hornet's nest, and they got like 6 guys at the gate. And as soon as one truck full of terrorists rolls up, they flee.
And they're not. Yeah, and that's the thing is, they're not even their guys. If people don't understand, most of the time these ODA type compounds and security state, CIA, all kind of wrapped into one paramilitary type deal. A lot of the people who are guarding the fences are indigenous, man. I mean, they are, and a lot of times in those areas, the first time a round comes down range, it's like roaches, man. I'm out of here. See you later. Like it's a bad situation. Yeah, and Ambassador Stevens, talking.
Well, that's why it makes such a great hangout. Yeah, right. Is because they said, look, we didn't have enough security for our guys. That is an outrage. Yeah. Right. And then they said, oh, you know what caused it? It wasn't the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and Ansar al-Sharia, our allies, the terrorist veterans of Iraq War II, who did this. No. It was a protest that got out of control because of this YouTube video that came out insulting Mohammed. Right. And so they put Susan Rice. Notice Hillary Clinton didn't do the rounds. That's right. They made Susan Rice do the rounds. And put the limited hangout out and then lie. The modified limited hangout. Oh, it was just a protest that gone wrong. So now you got the Republican Party in Congress, and every right-wing radio host in the country spends 3 years chasing their tail over this stupid modified limited hangout and never asking the question, why were they in Benghazi, not Tripoli?
Yeah.
What were they doing there? They were there because the CIA was running guns and terrorists onto Syria. Now you're surprised Al-Qaeda stabbed your guy in the back. Well, guess what? Just because we like Al-Qaeda and our government likes Al-Qaeda and gives money to Al-Qaeda doesn't really buy their loyalty, does it? I think we would have learned that in World Trade Center 1 and in the 1995 attack on our guys in Saudi Arabia at the National Guard there, the Khobar Towers attack in 96, the African embassies, the USS Cole, September 11th. You know what? We support them in Bosnia and they still hate us anyway. Isn't that funny? Well, here we are again, you know? And we're going to have a problem too. If you look, if Al-Qaeda that attacked us on September 11th is the problem and the blowback from our support for their efforts in the 1980s in Afghanistan, right? And then if after Iraq War II, and then they come to Iraq to fight in Iraq War II, then after Iraq War II, our problems in Libya and Syria stem from them coming home to Libya and Syria from where they fought in Iraq War II. But then we take their side in Libya and Syria. And by the time we're done in Syria, at their height, when they literally created the Islamic Caliphate, that was George Bush's ridiculous propaganda that could have never existed in a million years as recently as 10 years ago. At the height of that, they got like 30,000 something men.
Jeez.
And every bit of this, this is a war that started against 400 guys. It was bin Laden and his 400 or 500 friends were Al-Qaeda on September 11th. And we built them up into this giant thing. And now they're going home. Yeah. The survivors are going home to Europe. They're going home to across the Middle East.
The Northern Horn of Africa.
All across North Africa. I mean, it's on right now. We're actually like you could call it the midway point of the terror war, because what Bush and Obama did was they exploited your family's writ to go and kill these Al-Qaeda guys to protect us. Yep. And they exploited that to do everything but that and to spread Al-Qaeda hither and yon all over the Middle East. And look at the war in Yemen right now. This is one that hardly gets any attention, but it's a war that is absolutely a genocidal, deliberate starvation campaign against the civilian population.
Yeah.
That is the strategy, is to starve the civilians of the country into total surrender, as though starving people can overthrow their regime. We saw this in Iraq War II, in Iraq War 1.5 in the 90s. We're going to keep blockading you until you overthrow Saddam. Well, all that happened was we provoked a bunch of Saudis and Egyptians into collapsing our towers in revenge for what we were doing to Iraqis from bases in Saudi. So it didn't accomplish anything except a massive own goal against ourselves. Well, right now in Yemen, Obama started a war against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in 2009. But by 2015, he switched sides. And in 2015, he took the side of the Saudis, the UAE, and guess what? Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula as their main shock troops in their war to fight to overthrow the Houthi government, that the Houthi Shia had come out of the north and had taken over the government in the capital city, about in the center of the country, by the end of 2014, beginning of 2015. And you and your friends may or may not know this, but it's in the Wall Street Journal and also in Al Monitor. Michael Vickers, who was at that time the deputy Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, on the record explained America was working with the Houthis, the Shia Houthis who had taken over the capital. We don't really care that they've taken over the capital, said CENTCOM. What we like doing is killing Al-Qaeda guys. And what we're doing is we're giving them intelligence and they're using it effectively to kill Al-Qaeda guys. And we're having a great time doing it. Well, listen, 2 months later, Obama stabs them in the back and takes Al-Qaeda's side against them. And now Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has gone from a few hundred guys, couple hundred guys when he started bombing them, to, of course, bombing them only grew them and was counterproductive. Right. And so by the time he took their side in 2015, they had increased in size by probably 4 or 5 times to 500 or 600 guys, probably less than 1,000 guys. But then he took their side.
Yeah.
And we've been fighting for them since 2015. And there have been times where al-Qaeda has taken over entire towns and entire military bases, looted their entire armories, and there were 2 or 3 towns in southeastern Yemen, east of Aden there, where they had seized these towns for like a year and a half at a time. And with conscription and with taxation, I mean, they made their own little mini al-Qaeda state there. And then it was funny because the news said that the UAE's counterterrorism forces had taken them on. Well, all they did was say, hey, guys, you're really bad public relations for us right now. We'd like you to leave town and go stand on the outside of town right now. You can join up our mercenary forces. But it's just, it's a little ugly for us in the American press when we outright fly the al-Qaeda banner. So just join the join the UAE mercenary army and you'll be fine. Yeah. That was the UAE taking it to al-Qaeda. Here's some MRAPs. You know, it's Shane's old MRAP here. Have it, take it.
I only had Humvees.
Okay, poor guy. You're lucky you're
I'm
home
old, man.
Truck.
No, I mean, I told you guys, you better stretch that brain this morning. The amount of information, you know, what's crazy is, you know, you look at what this is. And I mean, bin Laden was a CIA asset to begin with, right? And so you have Al-Qaeda.
Well, not quite. No. I mean, there's no need to oversimplify that. I mean, essentially, as far as I know, and I really have looked at this as best as I can. As far as I know, he was part of the same mission, absolutely, that America, Saudi, and Pakistan worked together to support the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, as well as to create the Arab Afghan army and to send all these Arabs off to Afghanistan to fight. Now, their best guy there was Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, was their favorite warlord at the time, and then al-Massoud, I forgot his first name, al-Massoud, who was killed just on the eve of the war in 2001. And I think the Saudis took the lead in running the Arab Afghan army for the United States at that time. Now, I have read that the CIA did help to finance all of the construction that had gone on in Khost and in creating the Lion's Den kind of hideout there near Tora Bora in 2000, where we found them in 2001, where they were fighting in 2001, and that they had helped, with that back then. However, as far as I know, I've never seen any direct connection between the CIA and bin Laden then. I know that Michael Scheuer, he's such a fire spitter, I'm pretty sure that he would have gone ahead and said that if it were true. And he did the full review of the CIA's secret records to see if they could nail down whether he ever directly worked for the U.S. or not. There are people that say that he came to the U.S. in the 80s under the name Tim Osman to raise money. And I guess I've seen one source for that, but I haven't seen two. I haven't seen where that's, credibly nailed down. But essentially the point is that it doesn't necessarily matter that much whether he ever directly worked for the CIA at the time. The reality is the entire Mujahideen war was an American project. I mean, the local Afghans, they were going to fight no matter what. But here came the CIA and what was then Operation Cyclone, what was then the largest covert action that they'd ever waged, including, more expensive than backing the Hmong tribesmen in Vietnam or anything else. I mean, this was a huge operation. And then, the al-Qaeda guys essentially were the blowback from that. They came home. Bin Laden's original gripe was that, as he put it, and there's a good case for this. I don't think it's solid. I make like 95% of the case in my new book that they deliberately entrapped Saddam Hussein into invading Kuwait in 1990. Now, I actually don't think that that's really what happened, but I can tell you that in effect they did, because CIA were telling the Kuwaitis to tell Saddam to go to hell, while the State Department was telling Saddam, you don't have to take that crap from them and this kind of thing. So the simplest explanation is a lack of coordination on the policy there. The more complicated explanation was that they deliberately tricked him into doing it. But anyway, from bin Laden's point of view, there was no question. America tricked him into invading Kuwait. And then they went to King Fahd and said, now we will be the ones to force him out. While bin Laden had his own mercenary army just come home from Afghanistan and said, well, let me handle it, which was actually probably pretty naive. I mean, Kuwait is not Afghanistan.
Right.
It's mountains. And
oh, it's way different.
yeah. So they would have been pretty overmatched, I think, trying to fight that thing in a guerrilla way or whatever. But point is that he couldn't stand it that King Fahd had invited the white American Christian infidel combat forces to occupy not just their country, but the holy Arabian Peninsula land of Mecca and Medina. And this was what caused the major split between this, billionaire's son. The bin Laden group is sort of like the Halliburton or the Kellogg Brown and Root of Saudi Arabia. They're an oil services type, construction firm, a major construction firm, one of the most powerful and influential firms in all of Saudi Arabia. And here, one of the youngest scions of this group has decided he's had enough. He's taken his money and he wants to wage a revolution against King Fahd. And so they kicked him out of the country into Sudan. And somewhere in there, I forget exactly when it was, that bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri from Egyptian Islamic Jihad figured that they would go ahead and join their groups together, the Azam group and the Egyptian Islamic Jihad group, and create al-Qaeda out of it. And on the theory, their alliance was based on the theory that we have to attack the Americans first. We want to overthrow King Fahd. We want to overthrow Hosni Mubarak. But of course, America, the 8 trillion ton gorilla, backs them both. And so we can, first of all, never overthrow them. And secondly, if somehow we could and create our caliphate now, the Americans would just come and bomb it right off the face of the earth again. So the only way to get what we want is to play a long game, attack the United States, lure them into our territory where we can bog them down, bleed them to bankruptcy, just exactly the same way they helped us do to the Soviet Union. Yep. And then force their empire out of the region the long and the hard way. Now, you might remember after September 11th, all the hawks, I'll pick on Jonah Goldberg in the National Review, all the hawks said, oh, see, they're trying to scare us away. They're trying to scare us away. And that means the only answer is we must double, triple, quadruple down and stay forever no matter what. No, sucker. That's what he was trying to get you to do. He wasn't trying to scare you away at all. He was trying to provoke you into writing in your paper about why other people need to go and fight this war forever. Yeah. And at some point, the dollar will break. At some point, the empire will be shipwrecked on the rocks of Afghanistan and will have to go home. And only then can they wage their local revolutions. Yeah. And so from that point of view, the Afghan war was exactly the fulfillment of Osama bin Laden's plot against America, to give George Bush a crisis to exploit, so that he would then do the wrong thing and run the empire into the ditch. So if that's true, well, then what does that make Iraq and Libya and Syria and Yemen and Somalia now and on Mali and Niger? I mean, this is Osama bin Laden's absolute dream come true. In fact, I got a book back there on the shelf, Abdel Bari Atwan from Al Arabiya in England, and he interviewed bin Laden in 1997, spent the weekend with him. And bin Laden talked about how it was his guys who had shot down the Black Hawk of the Rangers and the Delta guys in Somalia in 1993 in Black Hawk Down. And he said, my whole point was we were trying to drag the Americans into, ready quote, a war of attrition. Yeah. Trying to get you bogged down fighting in Somalia so that we could bleed you to bankruptcy. That was his plan as early as 1993, to replicate what we had helped him do to the Soviets in Afghanistan. He was going to do to us. And this also shows the Leninist type mindset of al-Qaeda too, right? That, wait a minute, you want to replicate the Afghan war? The war where the Soviets killed 1 million Afghans? Yeah. You want a war between the superpower and the poor innocent Somalis? He didn't care. Nope. He's like, let God sort them out, dude. If you're a good Muslim, you'll go to heaven anyway. It's fine. Let America kill them all if it means that over the long game, at the end of the day, we win. Yeah.
You talk about one of the greatest military minds. Scott, I don't know if it was you that said it, but you take Osama bin Laden and you see how he moved 2 empires and bankrupted them, their entire militaries and then their countries into bankruptcy. You want to talk about one of the greatest military minds that ever walked the planet. This guy moved more than Alexander the Great. I mean, anybody in history I mean,
I'll tell you, there's this great article you'll love. It's by Jeff Huber, who it's just a tragedy. He died of pneumonia a few years ago in his 50s. But he was such a great writer. He was a former Navy guy. And he wrote a satire called Bathtub Admirals, making fun of all these guys. And I know you'll love this essay. It's called Osama bin Laden, Dead and Loving It. And it starts out, he says, eat your heart out, Charlemagne.
Yeah.
Like them apples, Alexander. And it's all about exactly what you just said. How here's Osama bin Laden hiding in the attic, even from his own wife, and in the middle of nowhere in Pakistan. And he moves. He's the greatest military commander in history. He can move entire empires across the face of the earth without lifting a finger, essentially. Right. And the Americans do whatever he wants. We overthrow whoever he wants us to overthrow. Who's next on the hit list? The Ayatollah in Tehran? Yep. Hell yes. Right? This is just exactly what Osama bin Laden wants. You know, our goals happen to coincide with his to such a great degree, you know?
It's crazy, isn't it?
I think the reason is he's probably smart, but if you have principles, and these are bad principles, I'm not saying he's a good guy before somebody
stuck to him, didn't he?
Misinterprets it. But if you have principles that with a higher calling and you follow those correctly, that's going to probably lead you to your outcome, or at least the strategy being pretty good. In the same way that we shouldn't compromise our liberty principles, and where that matter of fact means that it's a long game, right?
Yeah.
Like we're willing to die for something. In the same way that he's willing to die for something, if he sticks to it, his goal is probably going to get there, unless he's got hopefully somebody who opposes him. So I have a question. You answered like half of the questions I had written down, Scott, which I'm not that surprised by. But it's funny, you're talking about all these things, half of them which I didn't know about. It's like, okay, because America got involved there and decided to try to play one side against another side to gain something with potentially very bad motives, has created just like cards just falling down one after the other. And on top of that, you've got a bunch of uncontrollable factors. People who have these bad principles of, well, it doesn't matter if we die for the righteous cause. Like, how do you have hope? Is the hope in it can continue and the empire will fall at some point, and that's where we find peace? Or is there hope in something else? Because you are wearing a Ron Paul hat that says "Hope for America" on it.
Yeah. Well, you know, we had our chance. I'll tell you what.
So hope is lost.
Well, listen, I mean, here's the deal, guys, is that essentially, you know, the whole thing is based on a bunch of garbage, right? The premises of the entire policy are false. And so the truth ought to be enough to fix the problem, right? So that's why I always, you know, and I am a Ron Paulian in the sense that I really don't believe in political solutions or magical solutions. I mean, the purpose of a good libertarian is to educate his fellow Americans about why liberty is the correct solution to our problems and try to move that margin as hard as we can. But that's the margin. That's what we're fighting for, is to get people to understand the truth, right? So if I'm talking to you guys for the first time, or say you introduce me to your dad who fought in Vietnam and he's still hardcore on the terror war, and I have a chance to talk to him, then the first thing I'm going to explain is that this is all blowback, okay? It's not Islamic extremism. These guys used to work for Ronald Reagan, and then Bill Clinton pissed them off and turned them against us, essentially. Bush and Bill Clinton turned them against us. Then Bush exploited the attack of September 11th in order to carry out another agenda, which was to expand the power and influence and the footprint of the American military empire in the Middle East. Well, that didn't work. That was a total backfire and a disaster, because all it did was put our strategic adversaries, the Iranians, in power in Baghdad, while radicalizing the hell out of the Sunnis and pushing them toward a bunch of bin Ladenites, which hurt our empire's strategic interests in the region by empowering Iran, and hurt the American people's strategic interests in the world by empowering bin Ladenites, right? Yeah. And then so back to the bait and switch, Libya and Syria, both of these guys, just like Saddam Hussein and, hell, for that matter, Abdullah Saleh in Yemen, who Hillary helped overthrow in 2012. These guys are all essentially secular dictators that we overthrow. Now, we shouldn't be backing secular dictators or any dictators. That's part of what got us attacked in the first place. But for God's sake, we're not supposed to be backing the Mujahideen against them now after all we've been through. Right. And so at this point, that's why my argument is you just have to call it off. The reality is, whether you're talking about Bush and the Republicans or whether you're talking about Barack Obama and the Democrats, they are not going to fight and win a war against al-Qaeda and then stop. They don't want to. Right. That's not what they want to do. And even Donald Trump, who came in, who was elected as a repudiation of the Clinton-Bush legacy up there. The Bush-Clinton legacy, I mean. He won't undo any of it either because there's so many vested interests in charge now in keeping the thing going. He just can't pull back. And it's clear he does want out of Syria. He doesn't see any real reason to be in Syria, and he wants out of Afghanistan. Yeah. Now, they brainwashed him enough with the we can never leave Iraq because ISIS will come back argument. So I can't imagine in a million years he's going to get us out of Iraq. But he does want out of Syria and Afghanistan. But how hard is he willing to push to make the military admit that, okay, fine, we don't get to keep the Bagram Air Base forever. Who cares? He can't. He backs down every single time. He wanted, in the whole first 7 months of his administration in 2017, as soon as he came in, they presented him with a plan to escalate in Afghanistan in March or February of 2017. And he was like, no, I don't want to do it. Let's kick the can down the road. He kicked the can down the road all spring long. I know because I was writing a book about Afghanistan at the time, and I was trying to wrap it up. And I was talking with all my Pentagon reporter friends. When are we going to know what we're doing in Afghanistan? And it was, we're going to find out before the NATO meeting. Okay, we're going to find out after the NATO meeting. Okay, we're going to find out in June, in July, in August. And then it wasn't until the end of August, and I don't know if you guys remember this, they took him out to Camp David. It was Trump in the room with like 10 generals and CIA guys and him. Yeah. And Bannon was gone by then. There was no one to take his side. And they just said, you are escalating this war. You have no choice. And then he did it. He announced an escalation of the war he wanted to end. Yeah. And then he appointed Zalmay Khalilzad, of all people, Afghan American, but an original neocon. I mean, he studied under Leo Strauss with Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz at the University of Chicago, and then they all went to work for Scoop Jackson together. I mean, he was one of them. He helped write the defense planning guidance with Scooter Libby and Paul Wolfowitz in 1992. And this was the guy that picked Hamid Karzai to be the first sock puppet dictator of Afghanistan. And Trump hired him to make a deal with the Taliban. And I thought, man, if you're bringing Khalilzad out and you're telling him that essentially our only condition is to keep al-Qaeda out, well, wow. I mean, that's the basis for a deal with the Taliban. In my book, I said, don't even deal with them because I can't imagine the Americans ever giving in, essentially, and admitting defeat. You might as well just go and call it a victory, right? If I got to convince you to shake hands with these guys and tell them they won, you're never going to do it. And so, but it turns out I was right because at the last minute, Trump scotched his own deal. And he had a deal.
Always. Every time we talk about it, I don't care if it's Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq. I mean, as soon as there's an announcement out there and we're like, hey, you know what? Cool, but I'll believe it when I see it. It's always to that point where we're just sitting there going, damn it, like for once could I be wrong about the outcome of these things? And
okay, so that's a good question then. If all these things we see overtly, which he's done over and over as we're talking about, he kills the deal, he leaves like a portion of the troops in Syria, he tells them to go the F around and so forth. Is there anything happening in the background, the stuff that we wouldn't know about that you probably know about, where he has tried to minimize things, or does Trump just see things big picture too much to try to actually have a strategic
I think so. Here's the deal with Donald Trump essentially is, if Ron Paul is Thomas Jefferson, then Donald Trump is Andrew Jackson, right? So he's sort of a populist, even though he's from New York City. He's from Queens, not Manhattan. He's not really one of them. You know what I mean? He is much more of a right-wing populist, but unlike Ron Paul, he really likes kicking butt and watching explosions and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. Whereas, Ron Paul became a medic so that he wouldn't have to carry a rifle in Korea or in Vietnam. He would be a medic instead, because that's his mindset. And he really is interested in peace and non-intervention.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is interested in jerking y'all's chain, essentially. He knows that you're sick and tired of this stuff now. And he knows that what you want to hear is that he's less worse than Hillary or whichever Democrat on this stuff. But when it comes down to the wars, let's go down the list. He escalated the war in Afghanistan, not just by sending 5,000 more troops, but he escalated the air war to record levels. And we're back where we were in 2010 and 11 at the height of Obama's surge. And we're talking, more than 10,000 innocent civilians bombed to death by American air power just in the last year.
Yeah.
Okay. Massive war crimes. And you know what? Michael Flynn, who worked for Stanley McChrystal during the surge, he said, and I agree with the first half of this argument, not the second. He said, listen, it makes no sense to wage an air war against these guys when we don't have guys on the ground with good intelligence about who to bomb. So instead, this isn't counterinsurgency. This is mere, stupid, ignorant, counterproductive anti-insurgency. It accomplishes nothing. And that was his argument of why we need a massive surge on the ground, so that all the guys on the ground can point lasers for the guys in the sky to pick their targets more carefully, so that we're not killing innocent people. We're only killing the Taliban, hopefully, and winning over the local people. Well, that's stupid too, right? That was never going to work either. But his first point remains absolutely unchallenged. How in the hell are you going to wage a successful air war against a guerrilla insurgency of essentially civilian militiamen from 40,000 feet with robot drones and B-1 bombers?
Can't do
All
it.
you're doing is you're blowing women and children and regular civilians, elderly, innocent fighting aged males. You're tearing their lives apart with high explosives, and for nothing, for war we already lost 10 years ago.
Long time ago. And that's
right.
We're all we're doing is creating more people that hate this country, period. That's
and
it.
look, he's escalated in Afghanistan. He's escalated in Somalia. He even sent the infantry to Somalia, where before it was only special ops and CIA. He's actually got infantry on the ground there now. He's escalated both sides of the war in Yemen, especially the pro-Al-Qaeda war against the Houthis, which he could have called off without even picking up a pen, right? He could have just said out loud, hey, Secretary of Defense, I'd like this war in Yemen to end now, and it would be over immediately. And instead, he's doubled down on it all, on support for the Saudis. They call it the Saudi-led war, but that's just leading from behind. America is the empire. Saudi is our satellite. That's the way that works. He escalated Iraq War III, which, by the time he inherited the war, they were almost done, right, in Mosul and whatever. So that has, waned back down again. But when he came in, he had escalated it for the end of the Battle of Mosul and for Raqqa. And he's still got thousands of troops in Syria and Iraq.
Yep.
He's escalated the special operations and drone wars in Libya and in Mali and in Niger and in Tunisia and in Burkina Faso and in Sierra Leone and in Chad and down into Nigeria, where, you know what? Like, hey, there's a Sunni with a rifle. Get him. And meanwhile, all he is blowback from Hillary's war in Libya, right? He'd never been in Mali except for Obama and Hillary's war in Libya. Now we're chasing him from Mali down to Nigeria. And now we're going, oh my God, Boko Haram is tied to Al-Qaeda. Yeah, you're the one who tied them all together in the first place.
These are the guys that showed up, man. And I'll tell you, for the November of 2004 when we were in Fallujah, you know who we were not fighting? Anybody from Iraq. Nobody was from Iraq. I got a geography lesson off of dead bodies where you would pull out like passports from guys from Tunisia. I had never even, I was just a, kind of a dumb grunt at the time. I had never heard of Tunisia, the northern horn of Africa, places like Chechnya. I mean, you got blonde-eyed, blue-eyed fighters staring back at you. You're like, what the hell is going on here? And you realize exactly what's happened is, you created this environment for anybody and everybody that's not here to come and get their jihad on and fight the Americans, man. It was one of the craziest things that I had ever seen, and I will never ever forget that. Going, man, these guys aren't even Iraqis. This isn't Al Qaeda. This is something completely different. And now, obviously, chasing them back into quote unquote their home countries, right? I mean, this has got never ending written all over it, which kind of brings me to my next question, because as much as the Middle East isn't changing, it's always changing, right? Like, it's always crazy, it's always nonsense. But with now, the new prince in Saudi Arabia going in and snuggling up to, when I say snuggling up, kind of making buddies over there with like Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis right now. Do you have a good read on that, and what do you see happening with this relationship in the Middle East right now? Obviously, with a common enemy in Iran.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, look, it was a huge part of Iraq War II was not just the Likud party, but Benjamin Netanyahu's faction of the Likud party was the closest to the neoconservative group in the United States that helped us start that war. Ariel Sharon, I think, would have preferred to see us hit Tehran, but it was Netanyahu that really wanted to go after Baghdad. And the neoconservative movement, WINEP and JINSA and AEI and all of the major neoconservative groups, they were all essentially centered around Netanyahu's vision for the policy. And then, as we talked about, Iraq War II, all it did was empower Iran. It didn't give America sway over the Iraqi Shia and then therefore more sway over Iran. It gave Iran sway over the Iraqi Shia, and therefore America has essentially no influence in Baghdad whatsoever now. Oops. So that's not how it was supposed to be. And in fact, Ahmed Chalabi, the Iraqi exile who had come up with all the lies about the weapons of mass destruction, they must have known but somehow dismissed that at the time his headquarters, Iraqi National Congress headquarters, was in Tehran. And here he was telling these American neocons, don't worry, the new Shiite Iraq is going to be a loyal friend of Israel. And we're going to build an oil and water pipeline to Haifa. And all of this just absolute inanity that these neocons believed in, that Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz especially thought, yeah, it's going to be great. We game this out. It's going to work. Chalabi promises, right? So this is why they back our enemies, al-Qaeda, the American people's enemies, al-Qaeda, against their strategic rivals, Iran, is because they scored such a huge own goal on Iran's behalf in Iraq War II. Now they're trying to make up for that fact essentially every way that they can. So now the Saudis, and this is in the WikiLeaks, right? The Saudi king said to Dick Cheney, what in the hell are you guys doing? It used to be you and me and Saddam against Iran. Now you've given Iraq to Iran on a golden platter. Now they have our same silver platter idiom there. And I actually wondered for a long time whether he screwed up our idiom. But I got an email from a soldier who had been stationed in Saudi. And he said, no. They use the idiom golden platter. That is how they say it in Saudi. You gave Iraq to Iran on a golden platter. And so now what are you going to do about it? So this is the redirection. This is America trying to make it up to our Saudi princelings by backing al-Qaeda against all of Iran's enemies in the region. After all, you got to admit, like on a scale of 1 to whatever, Iran is much more influential in the region now because of Iraq War II.
Yeah.
So that means then that as a consequence of the Israeli-inspired war against Iraq, that now Israel and Saudi and the other Sunni kings have much greater incentive to band together to contain the Iranian revolution that now includes all of eastern Iraq, And so now we got to keep them out of the Shiite parts of Saudi, which guess what? All the oil in Saudi is right under the feet of where the Shia live in this Sunni kingdom, right? And so, but now, again, back to bin Laden dead and loving it, okay? If you were this guy burning in hell right now, looking up at the Middle East, this is like perfect, where you have the Saudi crown prince, like walking around in Western clothes, palling around with Michael Bloomberg at a deli in New York City, on TV with Benjamin Netanyahu from Israel saying this is our most important alliance in the region and all of this stuff. I mean, these guys might as well be working in Ayman al-Zawahiri's public relations department right now. They're like, listen, not only is your king an infidel, but he is outright a traitor to your entire interests on behalf of the Israelis against the Palestinians. I mean, in favor of the Israelis, already pretty much successful attempt to annex all of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem.
Yeah.
which is, Al-Quds is where in the Muslim religion is where Muhammad ascended to heaven in his human form, was where the temple used to be and is now the Al-Aqsa Mosque in East Jerusalem. And here is the king of Saudi, the keeper of Mecca and Medina, saying, oh, the third most important site in Islam, you can have it, Jews, I don't care. I mean, he might as well work for Ayman al-Zawahiri on his recruitment campaign right now.
Yeah.
And the argument that he is setting up for whichever political extremists in Saudi Arabia and around the region, that America will not settle for anything less than the abject and total humiliation and destruction of Islam and all true believers and this kind of thing. And that they can never rest until we've been brought down a peg or two out of interference in their affairs, is just going to get a huge boost. It's the same thing with the destruction of the caliphate, right? We could have left it to all of the regional neighbors to destroy the caliphate. They had beef with everyone. Again, 360 degrees, right? The Iraqi Shia, the Iraqi Kurds, the Jordanians, the Syrians, and their Hezbollah friends, and Iran and Russia and everyone. But what happened? America, who had created the Islamic State essentially in the first place, came in and carpet bombed them off the face of the earth. Carpet bombed Ramadi, carpet bombed Mosul, drove them right back out of there, and did what? We proved Ayman al-Zawahiri 100% correct. And we proved Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi 100% wrong. Baghdadi said, I want my caliphate now. And Zawahiri said, no, dummy. The Americans will come and bomb it off the face of the earth. That's why we have to just keep fighting until the Americans go. Right. Only then can we create our caliphate. Well, Baghdadi says, okay, you made the law. Let's see you enforce it from, hiding in your basement in Pakistan, old man. And he went ahead and he created his caliphate. And then what happened? America bombed it right off of the face of the earth, just like Zawahiri said that would happen. So what's next is our next tower gets knocked down again until our next president will be stupid enough to send another 300,000 men over there until we finally break the bank. In 2007, it was in 2007, 2008, when they finally started talking about getting the troops out of there in a serious kind of way. And Ayman al-Zawahiri sent a message, and it was intercepted and leaked by the military. It was intercepted, a message to what was then just had renamed itself the Islamic State of Iraq, just after Zarqawi was killed, which was ridiculous. They're this tiny little militia, but boy, they were advertising what they were about and what their goals were at that time, right? But Zawahiri sent them a message and said, whatever you do, come up with something. You have to keep the Americans there. Attack them, attack the Shia, do something to cause worse problems so that there's not a lull in the violence that the Americans can use as an excuse to pull out, because their withdrawal is short-circuiting our plan. Yeah. We don't want them to leave yet. We don't want them to leave until they've lost 300,000 men. We don't want them to leave until they spent a cool $10 trillion and broken everything. If they leave now, they're going to ruin the whole plan of keeping them there and bleeding them to bankruptcy. Yep. Don't let them go. Yeah. Al-Qaeda in Iraq is nothing without the white American Christian infidels occupying the territory to rally against, And so, I mean, it's just as plain as day. And honestly, if you go back in time, this is all in my book, Fool's Errand. You go back in time, bin Laden said all this in the 1990s before the attacks. He was saying in plain language, I'm trying to replicate our war against the Soviets in Afghanistan against you this time. Yeah. This is my strategy, and I expect you to fall for it and play your part very well. Thank you very much.
That's right.
So for all the 9/11 truthers who think that bin Laden worked for the CIA all along, how about the CIA worked for bin Laden all along? How about America has been dancing like the puppet on his string all along?
And that's not a far stretch, is it? I mean, that's the craziest thing. It's not a far stretch that the CIA, the State Department, the rest of the damn alphabet soup, in some capacity, is not working for the United States, for God's sakes. Like that mentality to start to understand that as Americans, I think that is a hard thing. That's that big, jaded, shitty pill that you've got to kind of swallow to understand. But once you do it and you're sitting there going, oh man, yeah, the light's on now, and look and now everything, when you're looking through that prism, makes a lot more sense than it does when you're, belt fed all this other nonsense and surface level crap that's out there. It's fascinating to me. Banks,
let me mention one thing real quick here.
Sure.
This is really the key. I kind of alluded to this at the beginning of the top of the show here. This is really the key for you and for your audience to understand all of American Middle Eastern policy post Iraq War II. Okay? The article is called The Redirection. It's by Seymour Hersh in the New Yorker magazine. It came out in the spring of 2007. The Redirection. Now, you need to read all Seymour Hersh from that era. Preparing the Battlefield, and there's a few other ones. I forget all the titles, but you got to read all the Hersh from that era. But this is particularly the one, okay? And what it is it's simple. It's just like we talked about. In Iraq War II, America fought on Iran's side, not just for the Shia, but for the Supreme Islamic Council and the Dawa Party, who were the favorites of Iran. And we put their guys in power. That is the summation of Iraq War II. What was Iraq War II? We all know it was bad. We all know 1 million people died in the Civil War. But what was it? It was America fighting on the side of the Shia and empowering our strategic rivals, Iran. Not that I care about Iran, but our government sure as hell does, okay? Yeah. But then, as I was talking about, the king of Saudi Arabia read him the Riot Act and said, you screwed everything up. You were supposed to keep the next Ba'athist in line. And instead, you created this democracy where the majority rules and the Shia and the Iranians have taken over. So the response, and in fact, Zalmay Khalilzad was one of the ones who came to Bush first and said, listen, we've really empowered Iran here, and we're going to have to figure out what to do now. And this became what they called the Sunni turn. And this was the awakening in Iraq was part of this. But at the same time, what they did was they started backing Fatah al-Islam, which was a bin Ladenite type group in Lebanon, to attempt to use them against Hezbollah, which of course failed. And then they started backing Muslim Brotherhood groups in Syria. This is 06, 07.
Yeah.
Right? Partly a reaction to protecting the Syrian people from their evil dictator who's mass murdering them. This is way before that. Started backing Muslim Brotherhood groups there in Syria, and started backing a group called Jandala in Iran, who were bin Ladenite madmen and were, beheading military officers and blowing up stuff and all this kind of stuff. And Mossad working with the CIA to do that too. In fact, Mark Perry reported that Mossad was pretending to be CIA, recruiting these guys to do their stuff, and that the CIA was all mad at them for it. But anyway, so in other words, in Iraq War II, America empowered the Shia, and then in 2006-07, they said, oops, okay, redirection. Now we tilt back toward the Sunni kings, which means, as you guys know, back toward al-Qaeda. Yep. They don't have a land army. They just have these al-Qaeda terrorist shock troops. So if we're leaning back towards Saudi in, say, Libya and Syria, that means we're back in the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and Ansar al-Sharia and Jabhat al-Nusra and bin Laden's men. Yep. That's who we're on the side of. So that's why I say when Obama did this, it's not because he's a secret Muslim from Kenya. It's because he's George Bush. Yeah. He was carrying out the exact policy. He was continuing the exact policy that he had inherited from Bush, which was, you could call it the redirection. You could call it the attempted correction, right? It was, we figured out that we screwed up and empowered the Shia, so now we're going to turn back around and screw up more by And it's not going to be long, guys, before we have dead Americans in another massive ISIS or al-Qaeda type attack in the United States. The first blowback attack from supporting al-Qaeda in Syria was in 2013. It was an ISIS fighter went to Brussels and attacked a Jewish museum and killed 4 people at a Jewish community center museum in Brussels in the Netherlands. And that was I think in the beginning of 2013. And that was just, and you know what? Obama kept backing him for years after that. Yeah. For years, he kept backing him anyway. And we had, the San Bernardino attack was inspired by them. You had the Orlando attack, which was, partially waged to avenge America's war against this group that we had just supported the rise of. Yeah. And so the blowback attacks, they say we're fighting them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. Wrong. We're just making more and more enemies here in the name of what we're doing over there. Sometimes we back them, sometimes we bomb them. Sounds like a really good way to get American civilians attacked again and more. Yeah, absolutely. And in this vicious cycle that this continues to happen. Americans are going to continue to be,
pulled in and taxed to death through this. At some point, it stops, and that's hopefully, I hope it's in the very near future that the bank breaks and people decide, instead of building walls on southern borders, that they would rather have a wall around D.C. or something like that. But it's this whole thing has to stop. I've got a couple more questions. If you got a little bit more time, Scott. Sure, man. One of my questions, and something that I was belt fed growing up. I think everybody in America is belt fed, is about their understanding between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I've heard you call it kind of an open air prison out there before. And I had never heard that term, and I'd really never done a whole lot of study into Israel, just because there's enough going on in the world where, like, whether the Palestinians are right, whether the Israelis are right, it was one of those things where I was like, we don't need to be in this. This is not an American problem. This is a Middle East problem, whatever the case is. But I think having this audience, especially to educate them on some of the finer points of what that relationship really is, I think that is a tremendous service and knowledge that you have and you're able to articulate. So if you've got the time to,
sure,
clearly say, tell people this is what really is going on with Israel and Palestine.
Right. Okay. So the first thing is, the reason this really matters is because Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker, was motivated to knock down the North Tower. I'm pretty sure he was on the flight that hit the North Tower there. He was motivated by Israel's war crimes in Lebanon. Now, that might sound crazy to your dad or something, that, hey, listen, this Egyptian studying engineering in Germany decided to join al-Qaeda and attack America because of what Israel was doing in Lebanon. You lost me, huh? What now? Okay, but here's the deal. America backs Israel 100% no matter what they do. And so America is responsible for what they do. Now, so for example, you don't hear me complain all the time about China in Tibet. And the reason why is because China is not a satellite state of the United States. And so therefore the United States is not responsible for what China does in Tibet. But America is responsible. Our government is responsible, and that means our society to a degree,
our money,
depending on how you count it.
Yeah.
And this is, we pay them billions and give them all the weapons in the world that they need and all of the diplomatic cover that they need in the world to say, you guys don't solve this, we'll solve it, but then we never solve it. And America acts as their American officials themselves call it, as they admit themselves. Bill Clinton's staffers, for example, Dennis Ross and Martin Indyk, both said, yes, it's true. We were just acting as Israel's lawyer. Right. So in other words, America is 100% on the side of the Israelis. Now, here's the controversy. OK, and let me say, this is one of the last things I learned about when I was younger and studying the Middle East, and sort of for the same reasons that you just kind of cited it. Well, it just seems so complicated. Yeah. And it's so far from here anyway. It's not really any of my business. And I actually remember arguing with my high school history teacher, who was telling me that this was important, and saying to her essentially, oh, yeah, God gave us this land. No, God gave us this land. No, God gave us this land. And so in other words, nobody's right. Everybody's wrong. And they're all invoking some supernatural authority for their claim. And so how am I going to, have a dog in that fight? I don't care. And I consider all sides of the argument to be essentially equally illegitimate.
Right.
But the thing is, I'm totally wrong. That was totally wrong. Okay. The Palestinians are not saying God gave us this land. It is the Palestinians' land. They have that land not because of supernatural rights and some ancient promise that God made to Abraham. They own that land because of natural rights. They own that land because of John Locke's theory that when you work the land, it belongs to you if you didn't take it from the person who lived there before you. And the reality is that the Palestinians are the descendants of the ancient Hebrews. The Roman exile never happened. Okay? They converted to Christianity. They later converted to Islam. But when the Arabs came, they didn't bring an entire population with them. They just brought their army. And essentially it was convert to Islam or we're going to make you pay taxes. So everybody converted to Islam. But guess who they are? They're the ancient Hebrews. That's who the Palestinians are. They are the descendants, the fellahin farmers there are the descendants of the ancient Hebrews. They never were exiled. They never did leave. But then the Zionist movement was led by, especially, Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, who are the descendants of ancient converts, who don't really, in any legitimate way trace their ancestry back to the Middle East. But even if they did, they've been gone for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And they come back and they don't say, listen, we want to live here too. They come back, quote, back. They come to Palestine and say, we want to create a Jewish state that you cannot be a part of. And they take, in 1947 and 48, they ethnically cleansed 750,000 Palestinians off of their land in order to create what we now call the state of Israel proper. Now, at the time, they lied. What I just told you was a giant conspiracy theory. There were no Palestinians. Everybody knows it's a land without people for a people without land. I just imagine. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
No one ever settled the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea, huh?
Weird.
Ever since the Romans kicked them out, no one ever came back again,
Seems
I guess.
like some
I don't
nice
know.
property.
It's a land without people. So, but here's the deal, and I'm being just descriptive here and not moral about it, okay? The Nakba, the catastrophe where the 750,000 Palestinians were cleansed from their land, that was as immoral as any forced march in history. However, it was sustainable. Mm-hmm. What they created was a 80-20 super duper Jewish majority state. Right. So it can be a Jewish state and a democracy at the same time. And there's just no question that Jews are 80% of the population. And so they can have it both ways there at the expense of 1/5 of the population who are sort of second-class citizens, maybe third-class citizens, but they do have citizenship. And that's a finer point. But here's the real rub, okay? The real rub is that in 1967, during that war, which Israel started despite all their hype about a preemptive strike on Egypt. Egypt was in no way preparing to invade them. They started that war. And at that time, they seized all of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But this time, instead of ethnically cleansing the land, they kept all the people too.
Right.
And I'm not saying, I recommend cleansing or whatever. That's not my point.
Scott Horton, why do you hate him so much? No,
it made sense.
Yeah.
If you want to create a Jewish state, it makes sense to cleanse all the people out of there. You have a sustainable outcome, at least. Mm-hmm. Once they seized the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and all the people who lived on the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, at that point, they created a de facto annexation of this territory. And in reality, in a de facto, if not de jure, apartheid state. Now, the reason that you always hear about a two-state solution, and this is confusing. It used to be confusing to me. I'm sure it's confusing to people in your audience, too. For people who aren't that familiar with it. If you're familiar with it, then it's not. But if you're kind of you hear about this stuff on TV without much of an explanation, you might be confused why they're always talking about a future possible Palestinian state. Because the rest of the time, you might get the impression that Palestine is already the country next door. And that the Palestinians are using terrorism to try to extort land out of Israel. It's Israel's land. And the terrorists are saying, we'll give you peace in exchange for some land. In fact, even the Palestinian side falls into the trap of calling it land for peace.
Right.
As though the Palestinians are the ones who are extorting Israel out of what belongs to Israel. When that is not what's happening at all.
Yeah.
They're saying, if you will let us keep our measly 22% of what is left of Palestine, then you will get no more resistance. We're willing to settle for just the 22%. We're not even asking for the rest of Palestine back, the rest of historic Palestine. We're just trying to keep the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And the Israelis won't even let them have that.
Yeah.
And the reason you've been hearing about a possible Palestinian state in the future tense your whole life is because it's a ruse. It's because what's happening is the Israelis are slowly and steadily colonizing the West Bank, especially. They don't want Gaza as much. But the West Bank, they call Judea and Samaria and claim that they have the right to it. And the Palestinians who are there, they're just going to have to drop down dead or flee to Jordan or go live in the Sinai desert somewhere. At some point, they're just going to have to get used to the fact that this belongs to Israel. And so it's been compared to two people who go in on a pizza and they start negotiating over the price and or how many, who paid how much and who gets how much of the pizza. But one side is eating the pizza the whole time during the negotiation, right? And so by the time you're done negotiating, the pizza's gone. You didn't even get your measly 22% of the damn pie. Yeah. And so that's what's happening to the Palestinians. And so it doesn't matter if on TV the Jews are whiter and speak better English and seem to be friends of ours. You know, my friend Sheldon Richman at the Institute, his cousin went to high school with Benjamin Netanyahu, right? Okay, and so, but on the other side, oh, well, they're just all these crazy Muslim orcs who speak a language I can't understand, and they come from the East, and they're merciless heathens, and they're constantly trying to extort land out of peaceful Israel that's just trying to mind its own business, and so they're the bad guys and whatever. In reality, the Israelis are the aggressors and the Palestinians are the victims. It doesn't mean that every Palestinian is great. Right. It doesn't mean that Hamas somehow now is a group of heroes as opposed to being exactly what they are, which is, of course, a right-wing religious alternative to the PLO that was created by Israel in the first place to help divide and conquer the Palestinians. Boy, they make a great scapegoat, don't they? Sure and do. By the way, so much of this conversation has been about bin Ladenites. Guess what? Every time the bin Ladenites poke their head up in the Gaza Strip, Hamas kills them to death. They don't arrest them and try them. They murder them. You know, and it'll be in the news. Hamas descended on a mosque full of bin Ladenites in Gaza City today and murdered every last one of them. And this is why you'll see Ayman al-Zawahiri denouncing Hamas as a bunch of sellouts for participating in democracy and for being part of the wimpy Muslim Brotherhood that won't take a stand and go to war and fight ultimate jihad at all times. Here, Hamas, oh my God, can you believe from Zawahiri's point of view, Hamas, just like the PLA, is willing to concede to Israel 78% of the land. If you will just let us keep our measly, stinking 22% and shake hands on that, even Hamas will recognize the state of Israel. Not just the PLO, which promised this originally in 1976, the year I was born, was the first time that Arafat said, fine, we'll settle for 22%. And they officially recognized Israel on 67 borders in 1988, when I had only been skateboarding for 1 year. That's how long ago that was, okay?
It's about the same year I started skateboarding.
My beard, I have a bit of a shave now, but I'm a pretty old guy.
Yeah, I was looking at that, man. You actually share a birthday with my daughter.
Oh, yeah?
August 11th, yeah. It's
and Han Solo. No, July 13th.
Oh, July 13th. Man, I was reading something else that said July 11th.
Oh, you know what? It's Wikipedia. They took down my Wikipedia page. So now if you Google me, it says I'm a 64-year-old lawyer from New York City.
Yo, man.
Right before the show, I was like, why doesn't Scott Horton have a Wikipedia?
I was reading that last night. I was like, this isn't right. But yeah, I did the August 11th stuck in my brain because of my little girl. And I was like, man, that's crazy. But yeah, so all that you just said, and there are going to be people out there in our audience that go, well, Hamas is that organization out there that is, absolutely in bed with Iran and
No, I think what people more say is that both sides, one side or the other, some who are more honest say that both sides commit atrocities. But the problem is when armies are a collective of people, and when you're judging people by a collective, you're always going to stumble down a road that lets somebody have an argument because you can't judge a whole collective.
Well, I hear the neocon argument inside the United States all the time that Hamas is a radical organization of Iran, right? Basically a proxy, and what part of their what is it principle? It's not principle, but
it's a principle. I mean, all principles are not good.
It's that they will never ever settle for living in harmony with Israel. Like they want to wipe them off the map.
No, that's a total lie. That's an absolute lie. Okay, Iran does back Hamas, but they are not Iran's 51st state like Hezbollah is. Hamas are all radical Sunnis. So they'll take Iran's money. But you know what, too? Hamas sided with the revolution in Syria, and the Iranians quit paying them for years. If they're paying them again, then they must have had some big powwow where everybody said sorry, because they were absolutely on opposite sides in the war in Syria. And they were pissed. The Iranians and the Syrians were so angry at Hamas for siding with the bin Ladenites and the Americans and the Israelis against the Shia there. Now, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon is Iran's 51st state. Right. And they really were essentially founded by the Quds Force. And Nasrallah, he's sort of like an American governor, right? He's somewhat independent, but there's no question that he is under the influence of Iran in that way. And it's true that Iran does back Hamas, and they will have Hamas, intervene in the peace processes, which are all bogus anyway, right, between the PLO or the PLA, the Palestinian Authority, the Fatah group, the old Arafat group, and the Israeli government. And that's not great or anything like that, but it's just a lie that they are not independent from Iran, when they are absolutely their own group. And it's absolutely a lie that they won't recognize Israel. Now, it may say in their charter that they want all of Palestine back, but their spokesmen have repeatedly stated, and their leaders have repeatedly stated, that if they could get a final status deal with Israel for 67 borders and a two-state solution, that they would not obstruct that they would sign on to that. And they would accept 22% of historic Palestine and renounce all claims to Israel proper if they could get the deal. And again, it was Israel that helped to create the rise of Hamas in the first place. You can read Andrew Higgins in the Wall Street Journal and Richard Sale in UPI. You can read Jeremy R. Hammond's book, Obstacle to Peace, where Israel created Hamas to divide and conquer the Palestinians. The PLA, Arafat's group, were sort of secular socialist types. And they said, what we need is right-wing religious types to divide the Palestinians. And so they supported Sheikh Yassin and all that, which, by the way, you just mentioned you were in the Battle of Fallujah in 2004. Were you there just the fall?
I was in the fall. Yeah, I wasn't there for the spring.
All right, well, let's talk about the Battle of Fallujah in the spring of 2004.
Yeah.
You know what started that, right, was originally the Marines had taken over a school, and there was a protest, and the Marines, somebody opened fire and shot a bunch of people. Maybe they had fired first, I don't know, but some innocent people got shot in the crowd.
Yeah.
Right? And so tensions were high in Fallujah. And then what happened?
Contractors.
Huh?
The contractors from Blackwater, didn't they?
Skipping a step. You're skipping a step.
All right, yes. Fill me in on this one then.
What happened was the Israelis murdered Sheikh Yassin, the old man in the wheelchair who was the founder of Hamas, who they had helped to build Hamas.
Really?
They murdered him. And that's what caused the riots and the capture and the lynching of the contractors and hanging them for their burnt corpses from the bridge.
See?
And that was what caused the original assault on Fallujah. It was blowback from Israel murdering an old man in a wheelchair with an airstrike in the Gaza Strip.
I had never heard that, man. That's crazy.
That's right. This is why General Mattis and General Petraeus, both of whom have every political incentive to never say anything like this, they both admitted that, you know what? Israel's position in the region causes no end of harm to our troops and our security situation in the rest of the Middle East. I mean, Danny Sherson has told me about talking with old men in their house in Kandahar.
Yeah.
6,000 miles away or whatever, 4,000 miles away. And some old man is going, you know what? If you guys care so much about freedom and justice and democracy, well, what about the poor Palestinians?
Yeah.
Undermining the Americans in every way, every day. Oh, no, we're here because we love you so much. But yeah, also we're Israel's allies, and we're here doing what they want. You go ahead and reconcile that, old man living in a village in Kandahar province, and see if you come out on America's side at the end of that.
Yeah.
And so that was the cause. And look, let's talk about Iraq War II then. Because of that original attack on Fallujah, because of the assassination of Yassin, you had a massive exodus of Sunnis from Fallujah. Where'd they go? They went to stay with friends in Baghdad, and that ended up displacing a bunch of Shia out of Baghdad. And they started fighting. And then Sunnis in Ramadi started taking revenge and started kicking Shiites out of Ramadi and out of Bakuba. And they all started going to Baghdad. And every time the Shiites arrive in Baghdad, they start displacing Sunnis, who now get kicked back out to Fallujah and back out to Ramadi and Bakuba. And the next thing you know, you have a full-scale civil war. And, it was Dar Jamail was the best reporter on this, where he did the chain of dominoes about how the occupation turned into the Civil War and how America, because he was even after Fallujah, was when Donald Rumsfeld said, we've got to completely embed our forces with the Badr Brigade in order to hunt down and kill the leaders of the Sunni insurgency. At that point, putting the Army and the Marine Corps at the direct beck and call of the Badr Brigade, Iran's men. In order to fight the war against the Sunni-led insurgency. And so all of this horrible chain of dominoes, the civil war, next thing you know, you have the bombing of the Samarra Mosque by al-Qaeda, and full-scale civil war breaks out. And all of these dominoes are falling, starting with Israel's airstrike against Yassin in the Gaza Strip that caused that riot, that killed those Blackwater mercs, that led to the Marine Corps invasion, and then yours 6 months after that.
Boy, and what's crazy is when you talk about that exodus from Fallujah, like I watched that, man. I was doing the reconnaissance on the north end of Fallujah while PSYOP, psychological operations guys in Humvees with giant speakers would have females out there, degrading these fighters from all over the world, telling everybody else basically, hey, the Marines are coming in on this day. And I think it was like the 7th of November or something like that in 2004. And man, you just saw like these cars and trucks and houses just packed up with every possible thing, and people leaving, man. It was like, if you're not here to fight, then you need to get the hell out of the city. And that's where they all went. They didn't go west. They went east. And when they went to Baghdad, man, it absolutely spot on, Scott. I mean, wow, I could sit here and do this all day. Banks, you got. I want to be respectful of Scott's time. I know he's got.
What's
stuff.
Our timeline here?
We're sitting at a little over an hour 30 already.
I thought so.
You can hit me. I'm ready for you guys, man. Go ahead.
Let's see. What do I have left? I kind of want to talk more about you. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much. I'd love to have you back on to understand you, because I've listened probably to hundreds of hours of you talking, and you just filled in a bunch more that I don't know how I didn't know, which just makes me think that there's so much more to know. I'm feeling a little less hopeful than usual because of that. Because it's like, well, I mean, if all these, it's just too much. So one question I wanted for other people, and something that I haven't been able to have time to kind of figure out, is how you stay on top of things. So I know you know the history, and the history makes it much easier to analyze like the day-to-day stuff that everybody sees, right? Like the major news. But where do you get the other information from? Like the stuff that none of us know about, how many troops are moving exactly, and what's happening in the background. You've mentioned a few websites and a few journalists. But what are the major ones? So somebody who wants to get it firsthand, because they might not trust people who wear Ron Paul hats or right. say liberty too much like we do. Where is the firsthand information coming from?
Well, I mean, it depends on the subject matter here, but honestly, and the greatest resource in the world is antiwar.com. And in 1999, when Bill Clinton was bombing Kosovo, was the first time I saw that URL. My friend Shauna said, hey, look at this site, man, antiwar.com. And I went, what's that, some socialist thing? And she goes, no, it's not. Check it out. They're libertarians. And right there, they're running Ron Paul on the front page. Yeah. Right there, I forgot what it was. She clicked a couple of clicks, and somehow we got to a L. Neil Smith article, which I don't even think is on antiwar.com, but she found it really quickly from there, was an L. Neil Smith article called Abraham Lincoln, the American Lenin.
Yeah.
are right wing as hell. I want to check this out. And of course, it was run by, Justin Raimondo is dead now, but cranky old Justin was, our paleo libertarian. He wrote the book Reclaiming the American Right. And essentially this is all, Rothbardian, libertarian, extremely capitalist ideology here. This is not left-wing socialist type inspired, Vietnam era new left stuff. This is the return of the old right is what it is. The guys that opposed the New Deal in World War II was, the legacy that Raimondo was picking back up. Yeah. And that's really what antiwar.com is about. We're run all by libertarians. And, the boss there, Eric Garris, is essentially just compulsive. He just makes sure that every single foreign policy story of the day is on that page every day, except lies. The bad guy stuff ain't there, but the good guy stuff all is. We have all the best viewpoints, and our news editor, Jason Ditz, is just brilliant and writes up the summaries with the important context that you need to know of the most important stories every day.
And it's a fun read too. I mean, the guys actually put some real emotion into what they're doing over there. It's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, you start reading Jason Ditz, you'll just love the guy, man. He's so good. And so if you go to antiwar.com every day, you read all the top headlines, you read all the top viewpoints on a regular basis, all this stuff soaks in really quick. And you'll figure out, I just had a conversation with a guy from bringourtroopshome.us last night about this, about how, essentially you dive in, you start paying attention to these subjects as best you can, and you start figuring out really quickly whose byline you like and who you don't. Mm-hmm. So there will be, you have to read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, right? You have to. And you'll learn really quickly that this reporter does some really good work sometimes. Like, say, Nancy Youssef at the Wall Street Journal. She's indispensable. You can't know anything about the world if you're not keeping up with Nancy Youssef. At the same time, you have to read David Sanger at the New York Times. But you have to know that he is a horrible Likudnik liar. And everything he says is a damn lie. And all he's trying to do is get you to start a war with Iran. And his guts are to be hated and despised. But you still have to read everything right to know what's going on. And so this is essentially what happens. You read the news, you keep your eye on the bylines, you figure out which reporters and which opinion columnists at which institutions start to earn your trust, which ones that you have to look through, a jaded eye at what they're doing, who's the good guys, who's the bad guys. And then essentially it's just a matter of quantity of sources and quantity of time spent. Yeah. And then pretty quickly you'll figure out whose position you mostly align with and whose sets of facts, to you are the most compelling ones. And, I just honestly, I don't think there's really any question at this point that the conservative consensus about what we're supposed to do here is already completely bankrupted and destroyed and crashed on the rocks. And we have our incumbent president right now, our Republican president, ran and won by denouncing the previous Republican president's policy completely. And, remember, he said George Bush lied us into war in South Carolina in 2016 in that debate. And the next day, Donald Trump got 2/3 of the vote, and the other 17 candidates split the 1/3.
Yeah.
So the era has changed. And people understand that on the right, that consensus, that what we really need to do is just support whatever George Bush and Dick Cheney think we need to do, that was all a big mistake. That era is over. There's no credibility behind that policy anymore. And then what do the Democrats have to offer? The same violence, but dressed up in wimpiness and cowardice, but with horror show going on, So, I'm sorry, I'm kind of off on some tangents here trying to find out.
You're done. Apologize.
No,
the reality is that most of the media simply just ignore this subject away anymore because they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And of the people who are still really interested in this stuff, it doesn't take very long to figure out who are the really good guys that you can count on. And, just for starters, I'd say, other than the top news section there, go to the viewpoint section at antiwar.com. We cultivate the very best of the left and the right, and we also have no tolerance whatsoever for any deviations, anybody being bad on anything at all. Will get you disqualified. We're real sticklers. But you'll figure out really quickly that when it comes to like focusing on the Pentagon and what they're doing, that, William Hartung and Bill Astore and guys like that, they just do such a great job of counting all the dollars stolen, the waste of the F-35 and all the different deployments and the wounded and whatever. And then you come to find out really quickly that we got Ramsey Baroud and a few others who are really great on Palestine and explain Israel-Palestine all the time. And you know what I mean? Like, it just comes really clear. Ted Snyder's great on Latin America, and Danny Sherson, of course, our regular contributor, who's a retired Army major who was in Iraq War II and Afghanistan, has all of his great stuff. And it's just like anything else, man. If we were talking about learning how to scuba dive or learning, your new job, at wherever you're starting or whatever, you just essentially have to soak it in to the point where you get it. And, reading antiwar.com regularly is the best thing that you can do. And I'm sorry to say that Justin Raimondo is dead, but you want to know about the history of Iraq War II? Go spend yourself a weekend tied to Justin Raimondo's articles at antiwar.com and go read the history of 2001, 2, 3 through 8 and 9 from that guy's point of view. And it's like setting off a H-bomb in your brain, man. You'll never be the same again. Trust me.
Can't unsee it. That's for sure.
No, well, that is very nice and not easy because it takes a lot of time and concentration, but at least like the focus is not hard. It's like if there's one website and one person to follow to get up to date on things, that makes like I just think most people would think it's overwhelming of like, where do I start?
Small steps.
Well, this happens with my show a lot too, because my show will be really inside baseball. And so we start the show with like, okay, what's happening in Ghazni province today? And if you don't know, you could really feel like you just got dropped in the middle of a Star Wars movie.
Oh, I used to listen to it and not understand 90% of the names that you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, the solution to that is to just stick with it for a little while and it becomes really clear. Sunni, Shia this, Iran is on which side again, and Saudi is which and what. And you know what? Stick with it for just a little while. And I hear this about my show all the time. I started listening to your show. I could not make hide nor hair what the hell you guys are talking about. But you know what? I stuck with it for 2 or 3 weeks and now I'm starting to get the picture. Now, when you say all this stuff, instead of being thrown for a loop every time, now I'm figuring out where the puzzle piece fits and how I can integrate this into a thing. And the good news is I just say the same damn thing over and over and over again every time.
Yeah, you're
so
teaching.
At some point, you're going to get it.
Yeah,
America started the war. America made the sectarian war worse by taking the side of the Shia and then changing their mind and all these things. Same thing every time. So tune in, stick around, and you'll catch on.
Learn one, do one, show one. You want to get really good at this kind of stuff, learn it, do it, and then show it to somebody else. Scott's done this, what is it, 5,000 times since 2003?
5,000 interviews, yeah.
Golly, man, I'm tickled to death that you made time for us today. I usually do a quick lightning round of questions that are non-related to any of this kind of stuff. And if you're cool with that, I'll start that. Hey, man, what, like in your spare time away from all this kind of stuff, what is your favorite type of reading to do? Not political, not war, not that kind of stuff. What's your favorite type of book or anything out there?
I mean, honestly, I just don't read fiction at all.
Yeah.
I pretty much, you
have a guilty pleasure outside of this?
A book, it's or specific foreign policy news, then usually I'm looking for random news on my phone app and just seeing crazy true crime stuff or whatever garbage, cops killing kids. The Free Thought Project. I don't know if you guys look at that
all the time, man.
But I mean, I'm on their evening email list. And it is just
it's crazy these days, man. We'll have to have you back to talk about that domestic policy sometime, because I know you're real outspoken about that, and I'll tell you, it is a big concern of our audience as well out there, because I see more and more people who were pro cop, right? Like we all grew up pro cop. I mean, government indoctrination teaches you, hey, these are the boys in blue are good dudes, and I'll tell you right now, they're losing that segment of the population fast right now because of what's going on out there. So
Hey, look, back to Israel.
Yeah.
You know what? I mean, I hate to say it like this, but it's just true, man. It sounds like the kind of thing some cranky person would point out. But the fact is, the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, and actually they changed this now, National Security is something I forget. They changed what the A stands for. But anyway, JINSA, they specialize in sending American cops to Israel to be trained by the Shin Bet, so that they're treating us all like we're Palestinians under occupation. And listen, occupation law is even worse than martial law.
Way worse.
It's a whole other level of lawlessness after martial law, where it's a foreign occupation army, essentially. And these guys are training our police how to treat every single American civilian and citizen like we're all Palestinian subhumans, apparently, under the jackboot of the IDF. And it's absolutely crazy. And, you know, people say that it's all about racism and this and that. That's not what it is. Well, it is kind of, because, you know, poor blacks, of course, are the low-hanging fruit for a cop. They're the easiest ones to pick on and get away with picking on them. Because what are the chances that some poor black guy's, you know, uncle is a state judge or something? Not very high. And so you can go ahead and get away with picking on them. But essentially all they're doing is they're acting out exactly how they're trained to behave, which is to consider every single person that they deal with as a potential lethal threat, everyone that they deal with as a potential escaped felon who's willing to stab them right in the neck, you know, on a moment's notice, and that the only thing that matters in the world is that you go home safe tonight. Your job is not to even risk your life to protect civilians. Your job is to protect your own life at the expense of the civilians, no matter what. And so that's why, well, geez, he reached towards his waistband, so I blew his head off, and that counts. And the judges will let him get away with that every single time, because essentially the message is, and it's been so many years of this in a row now. This isn't all because of the Israeli training, but it's just that's a big part of their brutality.
And you got AG Barr doubling down on it now.
And they have sovereign immunity from any lawsuit. They have qualified immunity, as they call it, from any criminal prosecution. Essentially, the only way a cop can be prosecuted, and there are a few exceptions to this, but for the most part, the only way for a cop to be prosecuted for the way that they mistreat an American civilian is if they call them the N-word while they're killing them. Because then they're open to a civil rights investigation on the federal level, that they were acting under the color of law when they were oppressing a protected minority group, and oppressing them under the color of law. But as revealed by the racist terms used, in fact, was really just lawlessly persecuting a person. But you understand that there's a very, very narrow kind of a loophole where it's the very narrow exception. And what happens almost all the time is the cops kick in a door and kill somebody. And then if there's a problem that's causing a controversy, then the local DA will say, well, I guess we'll ask the feds to look into it and see if they think it's okay, which is just passing them the rubber stamp, right, is all that is. And I mean, there's a major problem going on with policing in this country. And in fact, you know, it's all because of the war on drugs. And this is the root of why black people think that white people hate their guts, or at least don't care at all about them, is because every time they're like, man, a cop killed my nephew for no good reason. And then the white cop lovers go, well, he must have been smoking pot or breaking the law or doing something wrong, and take the side of the cop over and over again.
Yeah.
You know?
Hear it all the damn time, man. It makes me sick.
If somebody was going to take over the lightning round, it was going to be Scott Horton.
I love it.
I'm not very good at lightning rounds, guys.
Anyway, I'll skip to two other questions, because I think this is relevant. Anti-federalists, federalists, do you side with either one of them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would have definitely opposed the Constitution in the first place, and I'm against it now. I mean, really, look, Daniel Shay's rebellion was the 9/11 attack that they exploited to ram through their Patriot Act, right? I mean, that was exactly how they got the Constitution ratified, was by exploiting this crisis. And, you know, my partner at the Institute, Sheldon Richman, wrote a book. I forgot the name of it now, is The Constitution Revisited. About how the Anti-Federalists were right, and that we'd have been way better off to just stick with the Articles of Confederation. As Patrick Henry said then, I smell a rat.
I love it. Last question.
For all the marbles.
For all the marbles, cats or dogs?
Oh, cats or dogs?
Yeah.
Dogs. Yeah. I mean, I have one of each, but yeah, no, I'm a dog guy.
Scott, brother, hey, man. I want to give you a chance. Fool's Errand is your book. How else can we support you in the Scott Horton Show and all your endeavors, man? Tell everybody out there.
Okay. Well, I am the director of the Libertarian Institute. That's libertarianinstitute.org. And we got some great writers there and all of that. And you can listen to all the shows there as well. But then I have my website, scotthorton.org, where I have all 5,000 of my interviews going back to 2003 for you there, all for free. And I'm going to be really, beating the drum for Jacob Hornberger's run for the presidency as a libertarian this year.
He's
and
coming
all
on.
that, my website, scotthorton.org, because I can't put that on the Institute because it's a 501c3 thing. So all that stuff is going to be at scotthorton.org this year. You can sign up for the podcast feed there and all that. Then I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com. Find all the best anti-interventionist stuff going back 25 years there at antiwar.com. And then, as you said, the book is Fool's Errand. And if you live in L.A., I'm on the radio on Sunday mornings at 8:30 on KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles for anti-war radio.
I will link all those things in the show notes, and we can't thank you enough. As I said, I hope you come on again because I would love to know the background and how you actually. I know like the taxi driving and that kind of stuff, but how you came to all these ideas and how you came to all these endeavors, the Libertarian Institute and the radio hosting and so forth.
Well, ladies and gents, go ahead.
Ron Paul.
Say that one more time.
Can you see back there the great Ron Paul?
Yeah,
we can.
New one. It's the transcripts of all 38 interviews I've done of Ron Paul over the last 15 years, as recently as last June, and including my speech that I gave about how much I love Ron Paul last year at the Mises thing in Houston. It's the great Ron Paul. That's sort of my Willie Nelson IRS tapes there.
I love it. Well, hey, ladies and gents, thank you for tuning in. This has been The Rebellion, your place for peace, liberty, free markets. If you've got anything to bring to our attention, you can go to info@rebellionpod.com. Leave us something there. We'll talk about it here on the show. Share it on social media. If you found any value in this show, you can go to Rebellion Pod or Patreon/rebellionpod.com to support the show. And as always, we love huge 5-star reviews. Anything you got out there, throw those out there. It helps push us to the top of the algorithms. Scott Horton, our special guest today. Thank you, brother. It has been an absolute honor and a pleasure. Can't wait to have you back on someday and wish you all the luck in the world. We actually got confirmation during this that Hornberger is going to come on the show, so extremely excited to do that as well. But for me and Banks,
this has been your place for peace, liberty, and free markets. We love you. We need you.
Peace.
Don't hurt people and don't take their stuff.